As the G20 Summit kicks off in Hamburg, all eyes are on some of the individual meetings of leaders, not Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump. Is the chemistry between the two still there? And Friday sees the 80th anniversary of an incident which marked the start of a full-scale invasion of China by Japan. What lessons have been learned since then by both sides of the conflict? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. The 2017 G20 Summit kicked off in Hamburg, Germany on Friday. In the two-day meeting, leaders from different countries and organizations are discussing issues under the theme of Shape an Interconnected World. Besides economic cooperation, the meetings of leaders are also under the spotlight. Among them, the second face-to-face meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump has caught widespread attention. Will the bromance struck during their first meeting in Mar-a-Lago, US continue? Do the ups and downs over the past 2 months reflect the uncertainty of bilateral ties? And how will the Korean Peninsula situation test their determination to find a workable solution? First, here is my point. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis has said the U.S. was no closer to war with the DPRK after the successful test launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. If that view is also shared by President Trump, then this latest episode would not stand as a stumbling block between the U.S. and China, as it is also China's consistent position for the DPRK to ban missile and nuclear tests. However, other issues might loom in the talks, such as the U.S.'s arms sales to Taiwan, as that is an issue considered as one of China's core interests. Now, during a phone call just days ago, President Xi already told President Trump there have been some negative factors since their Mar-a-Lago meeting, and expressed the wish that the two sides could manage their differences and focus on cooperation. The personal rapport struck between Xi and Trump during their first meeting was a good start, but to win trust with each other, many more meetings and well-kept promises will be necessary. For more on this topic, I'm pleased to be joined by Zhao Hai, a research fellow in the National Strategy Institute at Tsinghua University, and Ina Tangen, current affairs commentator. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. Now, Ina, first of all, North Korea or DPRK is inevitably a core issue of President Xi and Trump's meeting. Now, after the DPRK launched a missile test this week, Trump tweeted that trade between China and North Korea grew almost 40% in the first quarter. So much for China working with us, but we had to give it a try. How do you read this latest comment by President Trump?
Well, let's put it in a broader context. You have the forces of order versus the forces of chaos. And quite frankly, I think there's more than a touch of insincerity on behalf of Donald Trump. I think he was trying to set this thing up, saying that, look, I tried everything, and this is what has happened. China has not delivered. The fact is, the 40% of trade increase was the non-lethal variety. They're trying to give North Korea the incentive to come to the negotiating table and realize that there's more to be gained there than through firing off missiles.
Zhao Hai, what is your take on this latest tweet? By the way, what are possibly the reasons for this hike in trade between China and the DPRK?
Well, on the one hand, I must emphasize that China has already strictly executed the UN resolution. And the U.S. only focused on number on the first 3 months of this year. As just mentioned, that actually if you calculate the first 5 months of this year, the total trade increase only about 15%. So minus the first 3 months, actually China's trade with North Korea is decreasing. So overall, I think China has been working with the United States on the issue of trade, putting pressure on North Korea. And what's following is that North Korea is actually accelerated its nuclear and missile program, which frustrated the United States. That's why Trump is emphasizing that the trade the pressure is not working.
Ina, how do you think this issue is going to figure during President Xi and President Trump's upcoming meeting?
I think Trump is still looking to find an excuse to fund his very ambitious defense and infrastructure programs in the U.S. And since the beginning, he's trying to use China as a crutch in that particular effort. He wants to create enough chaos, which he has successfully done, if you look around the world as we're seeing it today, that the United States will feel that it has no alternative but to turn to a very aggressive investment program involving debt financing.
Now, Mr. Zhao, we have talked about these negative factors. For instance, the United States, since the Mar-a-Lago meeting, the United States conducted a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea. The U.S. also announced new arms sales to Taiwan and has sanctioned a Chinese bank in response to the DPRK issue. How do you look at the reasons behind these recent frictions?
I think overall, China's relationship with the United States is very comprehensive and very complex. The issues that you mentioned, for example, the South China Sea issue, the American arms sales to Taiwan, and also recent sanctions against Chinese banks, is just symptoms of this complex relationship. Some of the issues is sooner or later bound to re-emerge. So I think there's no surprise here. The only thing matters is that both sides recognize the bilateral relationship is very important and needs to be managed. The difference, fundamental difference, that China, President Xi Jinping sees the relationship from a very comprehensive and strategic point of view, while President Trump is seeing this as transactional sort of trade-off relationship between the two sides. So I think they need to come back to the table and sit down and talk to each other about a more comprehensive relationship between the two, and recognize that some of the important issues cannot be solved through this business-like transactional method.
I know. What is your take on that? Do you think that there are these differences in style, and whether, if there are these differences, the two sides can come to mutual benefits?
Well, as I said earlier, I think there's a large amount of insincerity on behalf of Donald Trump. I don't think that he was actually thinking that China was going to be able to wade in and suddenly stop the nuclear program. That was quite. I think what he's trying to do is position, as I said, some way in which he can appear as the savior, as being forced into taking some sort of action in North Korea, and then blaming everybody else because he said, look, I gave you an opportunity. He's already held a meeting in the sideline of the G20. He invited Moon and Abe, and he did not invite China. Very strange. You start looking at the other things that are going on in the world beyond Freedom of Navigation Act, the situation in India, which came just shortly after a Modi-Trump meeting, and then also the situation in Qatar, which followed, yes, once again, another Trump visit to Saudi Arabia. So wherever Trump goes, there seems to be controversy following. The other side of this is that he's pushing Europe, Russia, and China closer together. There's these new trade agreements. I think these are the kinds of things which will actually be the thorns under Donald Trump's skin, because everything he's trying to do is to divide people, and these things are actually resulting in people coming together.
But still, China would have to coordinate and cooperate closely with the United States in order for for relations between both countries to remain as stable as possible. In terms of the so-called honeymoon period, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman said that it had been described like that in the media, and neither of the two nations had employed that expression. Mr. Zhao, do you believe that the so-called promising relationship is just wishful thinking by the media, and the fact that the uncertainty of bilateral ties has never changed?
Well, I think we're running into difficulties because now, as just mentioned, that Trump's policy actually pushing China more and more towards Europe and Russia. For example, President Xi Jinping just met with President Putin, and also this is they issued a new joint statement expressing their joint position on North Korea issue. For example, that they called for a no precondition talks resumed between North Korea and the United States, and also they say there shouldn't be any nuclear military operation in terms of solving North Korean nuclear and missile issues. And recently, President Moon Jae-in of South Korea visited the United States and coordinated policies with the United States. However, if you look at Moon Jae-in's speech yesterday in Germany, that Moon is more likely to agree with China to push for more reconciliation and dialogue with North Korea, giving North Korea more opportunities to come back to the negotiation table. Now the question is whether or not the United States could come out and endorse South Korea President's Berlin Doctrine, and also join hands with China to work more towards negotiations and peaceful talks in the North Korea peninsula, and also promising security guarantees for North Korea.
Yeah, but can we expect to see any substantial outcome or consensus coming out of the second meeting between President Xi and President Trump? Aina?
No, I don't think that you will. Everyone's going to be looking first at what is happening with Trump and also Putin. Xi will be a corollary to that. As I said, Merkel has already signaled that Europe is looking to take care of itself. You're seeing all these actors coming together. Even Japan and EU signed a trade agreement which largely will put the US at a disadvantage. So you see forces coming together here. I don't think that Trump is going to react well to this. This was not in the game plan. He was hoping to cause chaos and then go in, as you would in a business deal, and look for opportunities. And this is not happening.
Mr. Zhao, how do you look at the possible outcome of the second meeting between Trump and Xi? Do you think we can expect something substantive, or it's really...
Well, we go in this meeting with lowered expectations because of the recent negative factors. However, remember that not only there's this meeting, but also China invited Kushner and Ivanka to visit China later on, and then they will prepare for President Trump's visit to China later this year. And then there's comprehensive dialogue between China and the United States, and also a 100-day plan coming up in mid-July. So I think there will be multiple opportunities for both sides to talk with each other, improve relations, and maintain the stability, manage their differences. But of course, the North Korea issue will be a thorny issue at this point, and it's up to North Korea for their further actions, whether they choose more provocation or they choose to come back to the table as China and South Korea wished.
Yeah, Aina, I think we have to mention here that President Trump is also expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this is the very first time that they meet since President Trump comes into office, and amid the ongoing saga about the possible Russian meddling in the U.S. Election and collusion with Russia. How do you look at the significance of this meeting vis-a-vis Trump's second meeting with President Xi?
Well, obviously, this is the first meeting. Optics are going to be very, very important. People will be looking at the handshake, how they interact with each other. Trump had been very soft on Putin, openly admiring him. But just prior to this, both Putin and Trump exchanged barbs publicly in speeches that they made. Trump decided to reaffirm Article 5 of NATO, which he had failed to do in his first trip to the EU. And Putin took some swipes at Donald Trump on the enemy. So this is not a promising start to it. There was one area where Donald Trump said, yes, maybe Russia was interfered, but who knows? No one really knows for certain. A very odd statement, given where he was. You either agree or disagree with your intelligence sources and agencies, but he, for some reason, is going his own way.
Yeah, Zhao Hai, a quick word from your perspective. How do you think China and the United States can continue to build trust, especially between these two leaders, if the relationship is really poised to be stable in the long run?
I think it's time for the U.S., the political aides and all those experts to try to persuade Trump to realize that U.S.-China relation is very complex, very multi-layered relationship. This relationship cannot be determined or dominated by the sole issue of North Korea. So other than North Korea, we have so many different areas we can cooperate. The people-to-people relationship, the economic relationship is very strong and going very well. So I think they need to de-link the relationship between one issue from another and try to find common interest, improve win-win situations in other areas so that this relationship will maintain stable and strengthen in the future.
Unfortunately, every time there is news coming out of the DPRK and President President Trump would tweet something about that development, China would be mentioned. That actually, serves the opposite, as you just mentioned, de-link China from the DPRK issue, or de-link the DPRK issue between China and with Sino-US relations. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Zhao Hai, a research fellow in the National Strategy Institute at Tsinghua University, and Ina Tangen, current affairs commentator. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break. I'll be back right after that. July the 7th marks the 80th anniversary of the Lugoqiao or Marco Polo Bridge Incident, when a skirmish between Japanese and Chinese troops sparked a full-scale invasion by Japanese forces into China. On July the 7th, 1937, the Japanese army conducted a drill near the bridge without informing the Chinese garrison. During the drill, the Japanese army falsely claimed a soldier had gone missing and demanded they cross the bridge to Wanping City for a search. When their demand was refused by the Chinese army, the Japanese opened fire. The battle caused great casualties to the Chinese army. On the second day, the Communist Party of China called for a united front to fight against the Japanese invasion, and the head of the then nationalist government, Chiang Kai-shek, also ordered the mobilization of all soldiers stationed in Wanping in defense. So what's the importance of remembering what happened on this day 80 years ago, not just for the Chinese, but also for the Japanese? Joining me today in Hong Kong is Mr. Yoichi Shimatsu, former editor of the Japan Times Group in Tokyo, and Mr. Gao Zhikai, former interpreter of the late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Mr. Gao, the Lugoqiao incident was followed by massive atrocities committed by Japanese invaders later in the same year in Nanjing, China, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese people were killed. What are the lessons we have learned from these incidents?
Well, the July the 7th incident, which happened 80 years ago, was for many years remembered as the beginning of the 8-year war of resistance against Japanese aggression, which was a very important part of the Second World War. And even though China now claimed that the war of resistance against Japanese aggression lasted for a total of 13 years, July the 7th incident is still a very important part in our history. I think the lesson we learned is that China needs to be strong, and China cannot tolerate any foreign troops stationed in China launching attacks on China, committing all these atrocities, butchering the Chinese people, raping the Chinese ladies, etc. And the Japanese aggression against China was very, very atrocious, and it involved lots of crimes against humanity. And eventually, of course, Japan unconditionally surrendered, and China, together with other major countries, including the United States, the former Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and France, became victorious at the end of the Second World War. And we want to ensure that we are strong in terms of defending our peace, in repelling foreign aggression, and maintaining stability as well as peace, not only for our own nation, but for the world at large.
Mr. Shimatsu, now some Japanese people still believe this incident was not an incidental or orchestrated incident, but rather an accident. What is your take on that?
Well, the theory that this was an accident, or that the Chinese side started the fighting by firing on Japanese troops, I think these sort of theories indicate the fact that our political establishment in Japan just has not yet come to terms with the realities of the war and the war responsibility on their part. Now, this notion of an accident, of course, is overturned by two significant facts about what the world knows as the Marco Polo Bridge Incident. The bridge was described in beautiful detail. It's a magnificent structure by Marco Polo. It's in the southwest of Beijing. The two facts are the date of July 7th, and the other is the location of the bridge itself. July 7th is the Japanese holiday, national holiday known as Tanabata, which is the Star Festival. And this was a time during the war when the entire elite of Japan would be off to Hiratsuka or the countryside looking at these beautiful paper lanterns and things. The Star Festival is about the heavenly husband and wife who can only meet once a year, okay? So everyone is off in the countryside and no one's really in the capital, anyone of responsibility. So the Japanese military took advantage of that political vacuum in Tokyo to initiate this attack. That's why it occurred on that night of January 7th. The war in China was not going to be a status quo where the Japanese stay in the northeast and sort of cooperate with Chiang Kai-shek in the Republic of China. That nothing short of a total colonial invasion of China and then proceeding down to Southeast Asia. In other words, a total global war was necessary. So this was no accident. It was no mistake. The other point, the location of the bridge, there's a railroad bridge parallel to it, still in use, which is the gateway to central China. This is the railroad line that leads down to Xi'an, the ancient capital, and also to Nanjing. So I believe the original plan was probably to attack the Republican headquarters at Nanjing through that rail line. And of course, that's when the chaos of war started, when the powerful United Front that was started only 7 months earlier with the Xi'an incident between when Chiang Kai-shek conceded to the Communist Party's demands for a United Front. That United Front really had an enormous popular base. And without that popular base, I don't think the Republican troops, who were outnumbered 5-1 at the bridge, could have held the bridge. They succeeded in repelling a superior Japanese force there with the help of the local civilians.
Yeah, Mr. Gao, upon hearing, these theories and also, the rebuttal by Mr. Shimatsu, what is your take on this issue? What have the Chinese been reacting to such theories, which are really outrageous, just totally wrong in facts?
Now, first of all, imperialist Japan had an overall plan, not only for conquering the northeastern part of China, but for the rest of China, and not only conquering China, but also for the whole Southeast Asian region. And it also included the well-planned attack, surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So we need to look at these things in totality rather than on an isolated basis. And I think evidence is ample to show that Japan had orchestrated this attack as part of its overall plan to conquer this part of the world. Secondly, I think China had no reason at that time, back in 1937, to provoke Japan, because at that time China was weak. China did not have a lot of armament as superior as that of Japan, and China had no evil design against Japan at that time. Therefore, I think it was the Japanese who wanted to invade more and more territory in China, who want to enslave the Chinese nation, who want to use the Chinese resources as part of its resources to conquer more land in the whole Asian region. And eventually, I think Japan met with the complete defeat. And I hope that Japanese politicians today would learn a bitter lesson from that particular historical period, rather than persist in denying the responsibilities of Japan for those atrocious years, which also formed part of the Second World War.
Yeah, well, fast forward to 80 years later today, Mr. Shimatsu, this year also marks the 45th anniversary of the normalization of Sino-Japanese relations, and the two anniversaries represent two opposite paths. One is for peace and friendship, the other, of course, war and confrontation. Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said earlier this year that there are still some Japanese people who try to spoil bilateral relations. Who is he referring to, and why is that?
Certainly there's been concerted efforts by those related to Nippon Kaigi, which is the right-wing group in the parliament, which believes, has a totally revisionist view of the war, and believes Japan should be much assertive. Japan should be pushing China out of Asia. In fact, that Japan should be perhaps a dominant force on the Korean Peninsula against the wishes of China and Russia. So I think there's a whole compendium of political ambitions here which are not realizable. This whole coalition was seriously defeated this last week in the Tokyo elections. This is 2 years before the Tokyo Olympics by the governor of Tokyo, who's a much more sensible person than the members of Nippon Kaigi. So there is resistance in Japan, but I think the power of that force, that you know, of these families, in fact, Shinzo Abe's family, Nobusuke Kishi's grandfather, was part of the Manchurian group. They left China very wealthy and kept much of their wealth, and they maintained their position in the Japanese political system, and were able then to double back on the Cold War, to come back to power with the help of the Dulles brothers. So we see this group is very intractable, and it's going to take a really better understanding among younger Japanese people to really cast off the lies about history, the disinformation about history toward China, and to build new bridges of friendship.
Yeah, Mr. Gao, I have about 1 minute left. How do you evaluate the Japanese government's policy towards China in recent years, including its attitude towards World War II history?
No, China and Japan are important countries who are very important neighbors to each other. However, one thing which is very, very regrettable is that Japanese government, especially under Prime Minister Abe, insists on denying the responsibilities of Japan for the Second World War, denying the atrocities committed in China involving, for example, the Nanking Massacre, the enslavery of females, for example, in the Second World War. And I think this is really against the realities on the ground. It will be much better if Japan can come to terms with what really happened in the Second World War and do exactly what Germany has done after the Second World War and come clean of the atrocities committed by imperialist Japan in the Second World War, and this will make Japan a greater nation and the Japanese nation a greater people going forward.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Mr. Gao Zhikai, former interpreter for late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, and Mr. Yoichi Shimatsu, former editor with the Japan Times Group. And as usual, here's my last point. A visit to the Marco Polo Bridge, which crosses the Yongding River in southwest China, is a moving experience as well as an impressive sight. The bridge itself, which was first started almost 800 years ago, is known for its many small statues of lions along its entire length, each one in a unique pose that guarantees visitors will want to take selfie photos with them. But a couple of 100 meters away stands the Museum of the War of the Chinese People's Resistance against Japanese aggression, a not very catchy title to a poignant reminder of many of the atrocities that occurred on Chinese soil by the invading forces. Although there are many harrowing photos, the overriding message in this museum is that it is time for the two countries to work together for peace and a common prosperity. It is sometimes all too easy for neighboring countries to come to blows, but this museum is a sharp reminder of just how bad things can get and why giving peace a chance and remembering what happened is only a sensible option when disagreements escalate out of proportion. That's all for this edition of The Point with Miliu Shin. Thank you very much. And as always, follow me on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Have a great weekend and see you on Monday. You've got The Point.